pray for anything, the longer I go and the hotter it gets, the more likely I am to start taking my clothes off.
Be short.
So pray fast is what I say. Someone I hugged this morning said, "You smell really nice." And I said, "Well, thank you. I smell like my wife." The reason is we had some folks staying with us through this process, and I forgot to get all my shower stuff out and all my manly fragrance, So this morning I showered in with shampoo. I cannot remember the name of it, but it's flavored whipped cream. My body wash that I used, I believe, is cherry blossom. And I am sporting women's sport degree right now. I really just want to hug myself. I'm falling in love with myself. Oh, it's good to have a laugh. Because the rains came down. Floods came up. The wind blew and it beat on the house. 1977, the spring of, the Sunday before Easter Sunday, the rains did come down and floodwaters rose in the mighty Tug Fork River. Tremendous devastation to that small town of Williamson, West Virginia. It was the Sunday before Easter, and I was just 2 months old, or 2 months before my first birthday, I should say. And my dad and my mom were serving as the ministers of the local community, the church there at the 5th Avenue Church of Christ. The torrential rains began on April the 2nd, and by April the 5th, that small town experienced over 30 inches of rain. Church members began bringing their valuables, things they thought they could save, their furniture, their TVs, their photos, and other things that were important to them that were a great help. But the floods came up over the flood wall, pouring 20 to 30 feet of muddy water into that small town in various areas. My parents lived on a block that was spared with very little water, just sustaining some water in their basement that was a storage area for outdoor stuff. But the rest of the community did not fare so well. Pretty much everyone lost everything. And when the waters had receded, my folks ran to the church and began seeing what could be done in the community and helping people clean out. They spent many hours pulling out the carpet of the church and pulling out all the pews that were no longer any good and wiping down walls and doors and floors, and discovering that the basement that had all of the people's valuables took the brunt of the storm. The church members' valuables were lost, but they were spared. The Great Flood of 1977 is still one of the most devastating floods to hit that small area. Well, 45 years later, on Tuesday, September 27th, through Thursday, September 28th, 2022, the rains came down, the flood waters rose, the winds blew against our doors of southwest Florida. We were not expecting to experience much of an impact, but Hurricane Ian played a different, we might need some assistance over here. No, it's a dog trying to come to the service, sorry. I thought someone might have fallen, but the dog was trying to come to church this morning. So. Yeah, he's welcome. He's welcome. I think I was on my conclusion, wasn't I? Yeah, but the rains came down and Hurricane Ian took a last-minute path change. And the storm had wreaked havoc for hours, causing a lot of people to lose their homes entirely. Others to lose most of their valuables, things that are a great need and of great benefit to us in this life. Cars, clothes, furniture. And some of us did not even lose power. And many are wrestling with the guilt of how come I was spared? How come the good Lord didn't seem to bless all believers? And how do we handle that? Many are asking, why God? While still trusting Him at the same time. Many have expressed great anger at God. And some who were just beginning to look to God are now wondering if He's even worth it. The rains came down, the floods came up, the winds blew against our doors hard in one way or another. We're all affected. Hurricane Ian of 2022 has already been called probably the most devastating storm Southwest Florida has ever seen. Kurt agreed to allow me to preach this morning. It was, as he said, part of my master's program, taking a preaching class. And I like that Linda Knight said that really they're the ones that are suffering, not me. You guys have to listen. And I appreciate that. But I had planned on preaching, continuing our sermon series on John's Gospel from that 17th chapter. There we find Jesus, what is labeled as the actual Lord's Prayer. The one that we know is really the model prayer, but this in John 17 is the longest recording of Jesus' prayer. And it's broken down into 4 parts where Jesus prays that God would be glorified and that God would glorify Him when He had completed the work that He was sent to do. He then prays for His apostles and believers. He prays for future believers, and He prays that the world would come to know the Father the way we do. And I had prepared that sermon, began working on it, but instead the rains came down. The floods came up, and the wind blew against our doors. And I felt as if God was saying, I don't need you to preach for a grade today. I need you to preach some words of hope. So let's read God's Word together, and let's receive some hope this morning. And I want to share with you hopefully 3 things that can bring us some hope today. If you do want to take one of those Bibles, or if you do have some kind of way to use your phone, or if you just want to listen, I'm going to start off in Isaiah chapter 43. I want to just read the first 2 verses where we will discover some hope for today. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1 and verse 2. The prophet of God Isaiah says this, "But now this is what the Lord has to say. He who created you, Jacob, He who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters deep, I will be with you. When you go through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, and the flames will not set you ablaze." I don't know if you caught the hope in those 2 verses, but let me point them out to you. First off, we see God is my helper. God has helped me to do something that I cannot do for myself ever. He's my Redeemer. And that's what He's saying to us today. He was saying it to the Israelites then. Verse 1, the name Jacob and Israel, it's referring to people that God has called to be His own, summoned by name. And Isaiah, the prophet of God, he reminds the believers that God is the one who created them. God is the one who knows each by name, and God is the one who has called them and redeemed them. A couple of weeks ago in our series on John, I preached in a series to send in online, and in that sermon, I said that a simple way to understand God's calling is by this. God chooses those who choose Him. And so if you have chosen God as Redeemer, He has called you. And so if you have chosen God, He has chosen you, and God is calling all, everyone. And to better understand why God is reminding the Israelites here why He has called them, why He is their Redeemer, why He created them, why He knows each of them by name, we need a little context for the previous chapters, and also some key timeline events that will help us. In chapter 41, we see that during the time Isaiah is writing, God has risen up or allowed a powerful conqueror by the name of Cyrus to start wreaking havoc on all of the nations by coming in and destroying everything they had and taking them captive. And so God has allowed Cyrus to even come and overthrow Israel. godless nations can do is cower in fear. And so the nations, these godless nations, they start to go and try to encourage one another that during this devastating time, be strong. And then they get their blacksmiths and other workers to start fashioning these little gods and idols that they can pray to in hopes that they will be saved. I love that the writer of the English Standard Version commentary asks a very profound question. It's a great reminder today for us. How can created creators save? But they begin to fashion these idols in the hope to be saved. But I find more comfort in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10, as it reads really well with Isaiah 43:1. God is speaking to his chosen here, and he says, "Fear not, you have nothing to fear during this time, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. Fear not, I will uphold you with my righteous hand." So God is my Redeemer. I have someone that I can find my strength in today. I find my help in God. And God has got such a great, firm grip on me even when I feel like I'm barely holding on. Our community, which most do not know God the way we do, they are living in fear, especially after Hurricane Ian. And they are going around telling one another, be strong, we will rebuild. And I love that sentiment, and I say the exact same thing. Yes, be strong. Yes, we will rebuild. We will recover. But if we do not have God as our Redeemer, we will always live in fear. Because we are living and depending on created creators, which cannot save. And the things of this world, yes, we get attached to them. They're a great benefit for this world. And Curtis pointed out that they are important to God, but they can be just as quickly gone tomorrow. But God is my Redeemer. God is my constant help. And I do not have to live in fear, because He is always near. The songwriter says, "In the dark of the midnight have I oft hid my face, while the storm howls above me and there's no hiding place. Mid the crash of the thunder, precious Lord, hear my cry. Keep me safe till the storm passes by." Many of you prayed before and during the storm for God to keep you safe. And you being here this morning tells me that your prayer was answered. Even if you lost a lot, God answered your prayer because you're safe. The rains came down, the floods came up, and the wind beat against our doors. But I am so glad that I know the master of the wind, because it is only He who can calm the storm within. Verse 2 of Isaiah 43 gives us another wonderful hope. Not only is God my Redeemer and my greatest help, but God has not promised that we would not experience calamity. I know that doesn't sound very hopeful, but I want you to look at verse 2, because here's where we need to see where the hope comes from in a statement like that. Notice that verse 2 of chapter 43 starts off with two words, when you. Doesn't start off with if you, but when. When you. But it's not those two words that I want to dwell on, because I am one that I don't like to be caught unexpected. I do not want things to sneak up on me. And I'm afraid that many in the church today have been taught, or maybe only choose to believe, that believing in God means that I will never have to face tough times. Jesus even prepared His followers in John 16:33 with this encouragement. In this world, you will have troubles. But take heart, for I've overcome the world. Look at what Isaiah says after those two words, when you, because here's where the hope is. When you pass through the waters deep, when you go through those rivers, when you face the flame, I will be with you. And you will not be taken over by those rivers. You will not be burned in the flame. Friend, if you've been taught that God is only the God of rainbows and sunshine, you have been misled. Because God is way more than that. God is also the God who gets down in the dirty mud waters with you and brings you through. He's the one that faces the storms of life and says, follow me, let me help. I'll get you through. When the three young men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced the king's decree to bow down to the gold idol made of gold and all these valuable things, and the trumpet was to play, all the land was to bow down and to worship the golden statue. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow to any other knee but God. And because of their faithfulness, they faced the most tumultuous storm of their life. To be tied up, bound, and thrown into the fiery furnace, to be burned alive. And when the king and his men looked in the furnace, they saw the three men had been untied. And there was a fourth man in the fire with them, and it looked like they were dancing in the fire. Christian songwriter Martin Smith has written some wonderful lyrics for his song entitled Dancing in the Fire. He says, I'm alive. I'm still here. I've been through the fiery furnace and survived. I nearly died. The devil tried. But I'm living in your mercy on my life. So God is our Redeemer. And He gets into the muddy waters with us. And He brings us through the storms of life. One of our families in the church has lost absolutely everything. And they have had a tremendous storm this week that they are walking through. During this storm and even after this storm, they were one of the first families to come out and see who needed help. We've spoken with them several times this week, and every time that I talk to them, I walk away being encouraged when I went to encourage them. But one of the things that this gentleman said yesterday after going through everything they are going through, the process of what they now are faced with, he said, as weird as it sounds, in the midst of all of this, I have such peace. Many times Satan whispered, there is no use to try. For there's no end of sorrow, there's no hope by and by. But I know thou art with me, and tomorrow I will rise where the storms never darken the skies. When we know that God is our Redeemer, our Helper, that He gets down in the muddy waters with us and brings us through, we have hope for that day to come. We have hope that we will not be defeated in this time. And again, our earthly values, our valuables, that hurts to lose them. But we mentioned they are temporary created things that do not permanently calm our fears and save us. But God's loving redemption is a promise that we have to hold on to and to know that we can make it through, because that's eternal, not temporary. One more scripture I want to share with you, and then we'll wrap it up. Matthew chapter 7. 2 minutes I've got, though. 2 minutes. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 and 25. Jesus is teaching here, and it's been part of what we would call a sermon series of different themes that He's been preaching on. But He ends that up by saying, verse 24 of chapter 7, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains came down, the floods came up, the winds blew hard and beat against that house, yet it did not fail, because it had the foundation that was strong on the rock. God offers you a strong foundation that will never fail. Collier County Commissioner Rick LaCastro was interviewed this week by CNN, MSNBC, and other channels to give real-time updates on Naples and Marco Island and Goodland, Isles of Capri. One statement that the commissioner made really struck me. He said, "What I noticed yesterday in my drive around and talking to people is that we have things that need replacement, not repair. Total replacement, especially in the way of utilities. You know, normally, they just put up a pole that fell down. They fix the wire, and people get their power back. We have things that have been sitting in standing water, however, and the water rose to, just like the governor said, biblical proportions. That's not a repair. That's a replacement job." Why do some structures here on earth seem to do better than others? I mentioned earlier that some in our community have experienced little to no damage in this massive storm, and now they may feel some sort of burden or guilt, even wondering why the good Lord spared us and not others, and why God didn't seem to bless every believer in different areas. A complex reality is that earthly structures do better than some simply because of where they are built, what material they are built of. Some can afford more substantial structures and in better locations. Some have built more substantial structures but have placed them in poor locations. But some really don't have much choice, and so they neither have strong structures or safest location. But honestly, all of our earthly structures are at risk by something at some time because they are temporary, not eternal. And so when Jesus gave this teaching, he's not talking about earthly structures, but rather he's talking about the eternal structure of your soul. He's teaching as part of the Sermon on the Mount, and his lessons already have been on justice, care for the needy, handling the religious law, divorce, fasting, judging other people, and most importantly, salvation. And he begins this final teaching with the words, "Therefore, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like the man who builds his house on the rock. And when the rains come down, when the storms rise and the waters rise and flood, and when the wind beats against your spiritual structure, you will not fail because you built on the rock. When the rains of life pour down on me, the problematic waves do their best to knock me down, no matter how long the winds beat against my door. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All other ground sinking sand. There is only one foundation that you can rebuild on today if you haven't yet built. And that is on Christ, the solid rock, and that is the only one that's going to provide you strength for today and glad hope for tomorrow, even in the midst of a storm. On April 10th, 1977, Easter Sunday, the community of South Williamson, West Virginia, came together at the Fifth Avenue Christian Church, Church of Christ, to celebrate the risen Savior. They were wearing the only clothes that they had left, the ones on their back. Jeans that had holes and were filthy, sweaters, work clothes. There were no fancy Easter dresses, no hats, no sharp-looking suits, just devastated believers who had passed through the deep, muddy floodwaters, but had realized that God's promise to walk with them through the waters deep was true. They did not need all the fancies of life to celebrate the risen Lord. And friends, you and I our life today after facing this particular storm of life. We are reminded that He is Lord. He is risen from the grave, and because He lives, I can face tomorrow with less fear because I am so near to the heart of God. Precious Lord, take my hand. Help me stand. Till the storm passes over. Till the thunder sounds no more. Till the clouds roll forever from the sky. Hold me fast. Let me stand in the hollow of thy hand. Keep me safe till each storm passes by. God is your Redeemer. God is your helper. When you face calamity, He's walking through the waters deep with you. And He wants you to build on a solid foundation that cannot be shaken.